I never imagined that my own daughter would be capable of grabbing my arm with such force, leaving a mark that hurt more than any physical blow when she screamed that she wanted my entire pension for herself. Jessica was out of control, her eyes red with rage, blaming me for all the family's financial problems. She said I was dead weight in her house, that I was only good for spending money and taking up space. When I tried to explain that my Social Security check barely covered my medication and that I always helped with what I could, she interrupted me, calling me selfish and saying I should be grateful just to have a roof over my head. At that moment, I felt as if a lifetime of sacrifices had been thrown into the trash. Richard, my son-in-law, just watched everything from his recliner, nodding his head as if he agreed with every cruel word coming out of his wife's mouth. The grandkids, Lily and Mason, ran up to their rooms, clearly terrified by their mother's screaming. I took refuge in my small room at the back of the house, that little corner that Jessica always made sure to remind me was a favor she was doing for me. Sitting on the bed, my hands trembling, I began to question everything. How had I ended up here? How had the sweet little girl I raised transformed into this bitter woman I remembered the years I worked as a housekeeper to support Jessica alone, the sacrifices I made so she could go to college, the nights I spent awake, taking care of her when she was sick. My name is Grace. I am 68 years old, and this is the story of how my own family decided I was no longer useful. For 45 years, I worked cleaning other people's houses to give my daughter a dignified life. My husband James died when Jessica was just 12, leaving me alone with a child to raise, and no inheritance other than my 2 hands and the will to keep going. I never complained, never asked anyone for help, never let my daughter feel like she lacked anything. I worked from sunrise to sunset to pay for her education, her clothes, her teenage whims. When she married Richard 15 years ago, I had already retired with a modest but sufficient pension to live with dignity. At first, everything seemed perfect. Jessica and Richard bought a small but nice house in the suburbs, and I continued living in my apartment downtown. I visited them on Sundays, brought candy for the grandkids, and helped with whatever I could. But 3 years ago, when Richard lost his job at the factory, the situation changed completely. Jessica came to my house crying, telling me they didn't know how they were going to pay the mortgage, that the kids needed so many things that she was desperate. Without thinking twice, I offered to move in with them and help with the household expenses. I sold my apartment, and with that money, I helped them get up to date with the overdue payments. Richard found work again, but he was earning much less than before. I contributed my entire monthly check, $800, that I handed over religiously on the first day of every month. Besides that, I took care of all the housework. I cooked, cleaned, did the laundry, ironed, and took care of the kids when they got home from school. I thought I was being useful, that my presence made their lives easier. Jessica could work peacefully, knowing that someone trustworthy was with Lily and Mason. Richard would come home after his shift and find dinner ready, clean clothes, and everything in order. But little by little, I began to notice subtle changes in my daughter's behavior. She started criticizing little things, the way I did Lily's hair, the seasoning of the food, the way I organized the house. She said she had her own way of doing things, that I didn't need to worry so much. I tried to adapt. I changed my habits. I asked for her opinion before making decisions, but it seemed like nothing was right. If I bathed the kids, she complained the water was too hot. If I didn't bathe them, she said I was being negligent. If I cooked, she turned up her nose. If I didn't cook, she sighed as if she was overburdened. Richard seemed not to notice this tension. He came home tired from work, played with the kids, ate dinner, and watched TV. When I tried to talk to him about the small conflicts, he always said those were women's issues, that we should resolve them ourselves. I understood he didn't want to get between his mother-in-law and his wife, but I felt increasingly isolated. Jessica started inviting her friends over more often, and I would retreat to my room so as not to bother them. But I heard laughter, animated conversations, the sound of people having fun. One afternoon, while I was putting away the kids' clothes, I heard a conversation that marked me deeply. One of Jessica's friends commented that she was lucky to have a mother-in-law who took care of everything that I seemed like a free housekeeper. Jessica laughed and said that sometimes she felt that way, that I insisted on taking on all the responsibilities. Another friend joked that Jessica had the life of a queen, that she didn't need to worry about anything domestic. Jessica replied that sometimes it was okay, but it also had disadvantages, that she couldn't have total freedom in her own house. She said I was always there, watching, giving advice, as if I were the owner of the house. Those words hit me like a slap in the face. I, who thought I was helping, was being seen as an intruder. I, who gave up my privacy, my routine, my space, was being considered a nuisance. At that moment, I understood that my presence was not welcome, but I still didn't know how much worse the situation was going to get. I began to shrink myself even more. I went out for walks in the park during her friends' visits. I locked myself in my room during family gatherings. I spoke less during meals. I thought things would improve that way, that Jessica would feel more comfortable in her own house, but the situation only got worse. She started complaining that I didn't participate in family conversations, that I seemed like a stranger living in the house. When I tried to participate more, she said I was having too many opinions, that I was meddling in things that didn't concern me. Things reached a breaking point a month ago when Richard lost his job again. This time, it was due to downsizing at the company where he worked, and the family's financial situation became desperate. Jessica went into a total panic. She started talking constantly about money, about debts, about how they were going to get by. I continued contributing my full check, but now it was no longer enough to cover all the expenses of a family of 4. It was then that Jessica started making comments that froze my blood. She said we needed to optimize resources, that we had to make difficult decisions. She talked about the possibility of me moving to a smaller and cheaper place so they could rent out my room and generate extra income. When I asked her where I was supposed to go, she told me there were very nice nursing homes places where I would be better taken care of and where I wouldn't have to worry about the family's financial problems. The conversation that changed everything happened yesterday morning. Jessica woke up in a terrible mood, argued with Richard about who knows what, scolded the kids for making noise, and then took it out on me. She told me she was fed up with the situation, that she needed me to make a decision soon, that either I really helped with more money or I should go live somewhere else, where I wasn't a burden to anyone. When I told her that my pension was already everything I had, that I couldn't give more, she screamed at me, asking what was the use of having me there then. I can't take it anymore, she yelled while pacing back and forth in the kitchen. My whole life I've had to carry responsibilities that aren't mine. First I took care of Dad when he was sick. Now I have to take care of you. I need you to give me your entire check. Mom, all of it, not just a part. If you are going to live here, you have to really contribute. I explained to her that my check of $800 was already being given in full, that I didn't have any more money. That was when she said something I will never forget. Then sell something, pawn, something, get more money from wherever. But you can't keep being another expense in this house. I'm too old to be carrying people who contribute nothing. People who contribute nothing. Those were her exact words. 45 years working to give her everything, 3 years living in her house, contributing my full income, and taking charge of all the domestic labor. And I was people who contributed nothing. At that moment, I felt as if something inside my chest broke, definitely. The following days were hell. Jessica treated me with a coldness that tore me apart inside. She spoke to me only what was necessary, as if I were a stranger passing through. Richard avoided my gaze, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, but without the courage to defend the woman who had taken care of his children for 3 years. Lily and Mason seemed confused by the tense atmosphere in the house. Lily, who was always affectionate with me, now barely said hello. Mason still came to give me hugs in secret when his mom wasn't looking, but I noticed he was scared by the whole situation. Last night, after everyone went to sleep, I stayed awake in my bed, thinking about everything I had lived through. I remembered when Jessica was little and ran to hug me every time I came home from work. I remembered the nights I spent awake when she had a fever, The times I stayed up late sewing costumes for school plays, the Sundays I chose not to go out to save money and buy her the school supplies she needed. I also remembered when she got married how beautiful she looked in the dress I helped pay for the happiness in her eyes when she introduced me to Richard as the best mom in the world. I remembered when Lily and Mason were born, how she asked me to be her support to help her be a good mother like I had been with her. And now, after a lifetime of unconditional love, I had become her burden, the problem she needed to solve in order to be happy. This morning I woke up with a strange sense of calm. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel that knot in my stomach that accompanied me since Jessica started with her cruel comments. I got dressed with care, combed my hair the way I like, and went down to breakfast. The family was gathered at the table like every morning, but the atmosphere was heavy and silent. Jessica looked at me with a dark expression when I sat at the table. "Mom," she said with a dry voice, "I hope you have thought about what we talked about. I need an answer soon. We can't go on like this." I looked her in the eyes. At that 42-year-old woman who was once my little princess, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something different from pain. I felt a strange mixture of sadness and liberation. "Yes, honey," I told her with a calm voice. "I have already made my decision." Richard looked up from his coffee, waiting to hear what I had decided to do with my life. Lily and Mason stopped playing with their food and looked at me with curiosity. Jessica smiled with satisfaction, probably thinking she had finally managed to break my resistance. And well, she asked me with an impatient tone, "What did you decide?" I got up from the table, slowly clasped my hands so they wouldn't tremble, and gave everyone one last look. "I decided that you were right," I told them. "It is time for me to stop being a burden to this family." Jessica nodded with visible relief. "I am very glad you understand, Mom. You will see that everything is going to be better this way. We can start looking for options this weekend." I went up to my room and closed the door. I sat on the bed, and for the first time in 3 years, I smiled. Because they didn't know that when I said I had decided to stop being a burden, I wasn't referring to moving to a nursing home. I was referring to something completely different. The next morning, when I was still processing everything that had happened, we heard loud knocks on the door. It was 2 local police officers. My heart raced, thinking Jessica had invented some story about me. But when they asked for Richard, I understood they hadn't come because of me. Apparently, my son-in-law had pending issues related to work that I was completely unaware of. I watched as they took Richard away in handcuffs while Jessica screamed and cried desperately. At that moment, while I observed the chaos settling into the house, I realized that I was not the problem in this family. But what they didn't know was that everything was about to change. After they took Richard away, the house fell into total silence. Jessica spent the first few days coming and going from the police station trying to resolve her husband's situation. When she was home, she treated me with a coldness that destroyed me completely. She spoke to me only what was necessary, as if I were a stranger passing through. But now, without Richard to support her, I noticed she was more vulnerable and at the same time more economically desperate. The kids seemed confused by their dad's disappearance and the tense climate in the house. Lily, who was always affectionate with me now, barely said hello. Mason still came to give me hugs in secret when his mom wasn't looking, but I noticed he was scared by the whole situation. One afternoon, while Jessica had gone out for another visit to the police station, I organized my few belongings and found a box with old photographs. I sat on the bed and began to look through the memories of a lifetime. There were photos of when Jessica was little, smiling in my arms, of her graduations, of her wedding with Richard. In every image, I was there, always present, always supporting. I remembered how I sold my small apartment to help Jessica and Richard with the down payment for the house where we lived now. I remembered the countless loans I took out to help them in difficult times, using my name and my pension as a guarantee. I remembered the times I took care of the grandkids when they were little, allowing Jessica and Richard to work peacefully. All that seemed to have been completely forgotten. The first photograph I took in my trembling hands showed Jessica at 5 years old on her first day of school. I was kneeling next to her, fixing the uniform I had sewn myself during the nights after coming home from work. I remembered that day perfectly. I had gotten up at 4 in the morning to iron her skirt to make her a special breakfast to walk her to school because we didn't have money for the bus. In the photo, Jessica was hugging me with a huge smile, and I was looking at her with so much love that even now, more than 30 years later, I could feel the same emotion in my chest. The next photo was from her sweet 16. I had worked extra shifts for a whole year to be able to pay for a dignified party. It wasn't the biggest or the most luxurious in the neighborhood, but it was made with so much love that all the guests commented on how beautiful it had turned out. In the image, Jessica was dancing with me, the traditional mother-daughter waltz, both of us crying with happiness. That day when she thanked me for everything I had done for her, she promised she would never fail me, that she would always take care of me just as I had taken care of her. Where had that promise gone? There was also a photo of when Jessica graduated as an executive assistant, the career she had wanted to study so much. I was in the front row in the auditorium, applauding with tears in my eyes while she received her diploma. I remembered all the sacrifices I had made to pay for that degree, working weekends selling my few pieces of jewelry, giving up any personal luxury for 3 years. When she finished her studies, she got a good job in a government office, and during the first few years, she visited me, constantly brought me gifts, told me that everything she had achieved was thanks to me. I also found the photo of her wedding 15 years ago. I had spent all my savings helping her organize the ceremony. Richard was a good boy back then, hardworking, respectful, who seemed to love her genuinely. During the exchange of vows, Jessica dedicated some words to me that still resonated in my heart. Thanks to my mom, who taught me that true love is the one that never asks for anything in return. Those words now sounded like a cruel joke of destiny. The photographs of Lily and Mason as babies brought back particularly painful memories. I had been practically their second mom since they were born. When Jessica returned to work after her maternity leave, I was the one who took care of them during the day. It was me who taught them to walk, who heard their first words, who comforted them during the nights when they had nightmares. For years, they came running to hug me every time they saw me. They called me Grandma Grace, with so much affection that it melted my heart. I remembered the afternoons we spent playing in the park when Jessica and Richard were working. Lily always wanted me to tell her stories, and I invented fantastic tales that made her laugh until she fell asleep. Mason was more restless. He liked for us to play soccer, even though my knees were no longer up for that. I took them to get ice cream with my pension money, bought them small toys when I had extra cash, took care of them with the same dedication with which I had taken care of their mom. But the most recent photos told a different story. In the last family images, I always appeared in the background like one more piece of furniture in the house. The kids no longer looked for me to play. Jessica no longer included me in conversations. Richard treated me with forced courtesy. When exactly had that transformation begun? At what moment did I stop being the beloved grandmother to become the inconvenient burden? When Jessica returned that night, she was even more stressed than usual. During dinner, I tried to talk about Richard's situation and offered to help with whatever was possible, although I knew my funds were limited. Jessica looked at me with impatience and told me that my help made no difference, that the problem was much bigger than I imagined. She said that now, with Richard in jail, she needed more than ever for me to contribute significantly or look for another place to live. She explained that she wasn't in a condition to support the house alone and keep me too. Mom, she told me, while nervously picking at the food on her plate, you can't keep thinking that with $800 a month you are really helping. That isn't enough for even half the utility bills. Gas is expensive. The phone bill is high. Food, for 5 people, costs a fortune every week. Without Richard, I can't handle all this alone. I explained that I understood the situation, but that my check was all I had, that there was no way to get more money at my age. Then she answered me with a tone that froze my blood. "You will have to make a decision. Either you find a way to get more money or look for a place where keeping you isn't so expensive. There are residences for seniors where with your pension you can live comfortably and we could move forward without the extra pressure." When I tried to argue about everything I had already done for them, about the years I had invested, taking care of her children, about the money from my apartment that I had used to help them, Jessica told me that was the past, that now she was alone with 2 children and needed to think about the present. "I can't maintain eternal gratitude, Mom. Now the situation is different and we all have to adapt to the new reality." And at that moment, while I listened to her talk about eternal gratitude as if it were something negative, something inside me finally broke. It wasn't anger I felt, but a deep sadness and a clarity I hadn't had in months. My daughter no longer saw me as her mother, but as an uncomfortable obligation she needed to solve in the most convenient way possible. That night, after everyone went to sleep, I stayed awake remembering specific moments that now took on a new meaning. I remembered when Jessica turned 30 and organized a party at the house. She invited all her friends, prepared an elegant dinner, decorated everything very nicely. I spent the whole afternoon helping her in the kitchen, serving the guests, washing dishes. At the end of the night, when all the friends left, one of them commented how lucky she was to have a mom who helped her so much. Jessica laughed and said, "Yes, it is very comfortable to have free service 24 hours a day." At that moment, I thought it was just a joke, but now I understood it had been an unconscious confession. For Jessica, I was no longer her beloved mother, but her free housekeeper. And when employees are no longer useful or become too expensive to keep, they are fired. I also remembered a conversation I had overheard by chance a few months ago. Jessica was talking on the phone with her sister who lives in Chicago. She was telling her about the financial difficulties they were going through, and her sister suggested she ask me for more money, that surely I had hidden savings. "No, sis." Jessica answered her, "My mom doesn't have any more money. I think she already gave us everything she had when she helped us with the house. But the problem is that now she is also an expense, do you understand? She eats, uses electricity, uses water, and her check is no longer enough to compensate for all that." Her sister asked if she hadn't considered the possibility of me going to live with some other relative, and Jessica told her we didn't have any more close family, that I didn't have more options. "That's why I feel so pressured," she explained. "I know I have the moral obligation to take care of her, but economically it is impossible. Sometimes I think it would be better for everyone if she were in a specialized place." That was how my daughter referred to the possibility of putting me in a nursing home, not as a comfortable option for me, but as a convenient solution for her. I remembered that after that phone conversation, Jessica started making casual comments about residences for seniors, about how well they took care of people there, about how nice the facilities were. The next day, while Jessica was at the police station again, I decided to go out for a walk. I needed fresh air. I needed to think clearly. I needed to remember who I was before becoming my daughter's burden. I walked to the park where I used to take Lily and Mason when they were little. I sat on the same bench where I had watched them take their first steps, where we had fed the pigeons, where we had spent so many happy afternoons. In the park, I ran into Connie, a neighbor from the block I had known for years. She was also a widow and lived alone in a small but cozy house. We started talking, and without realizing it, I ended up telling her everything that was happening. Connie listened to me with patience, nodding her head with understanding. "Oh, Grace." She told me when I finished telling her my story, "Don't you realize what is happening? Your daughter is manipulating you. She is making you feel guilty for basic needs that any person has. Eating is not a luxury. Having a place to sleep is not a favor she is doing for you." Her words fell on me like a bolt of lightning. Connie was right. Jessica had made me feel as if my existence was a problem she had to solve, as if my basic needs were selfish whims. She had convinced me that I was a burden, when in reality, it had been me who had carried her throughout her entire life. Besides, Connie continued, "You have rights, Grace. You have the right to live with dignity, to be respected, not to be treated like an obstacle anywhere. If your daughter cannot value everything you have done for her, the problem isn't you, it's her. I returned home that afternoon with a completely different perspective. For the first time in months, I didn't feel guilty for taking up space in that house. For the first time in a long time, I remembered that I also had rights, that I also deserved respect, that I was also a valuable person, regardless of how much money I could bring in. That night during dinner, I observed my family with new eyes. Lily played with her food, complaining that she didn't like the stew I had prepared. Mason asked for money to buy Pokemon cards he had seen at the store. Jessica constantly checked her phone, sighing dramatically every time she read a message probably related to Richard's legal situation. No one asked me how I had spent the day. No one noticed I had gone out for several hours. No one thanked me for the food I had prepared, the clothes I had washed, the house I had cleaned. It was as if I were invisible, as if my actions were automatic and without value. After dinner, while I was gathering the dirty dishes everyone had left on the table, Jessica approached me in the kitchen. "Mom," she said with a tone that pretended to be kind but sounded forced, "I have been thinking about our conversation yesterday. Maybe we could find an intermediate solution." I turned to look at her drying my hands with the kitchen towel. "What kind of intermediate solution?" "No," she said, avoiding my direct gaze. "Maybe you don't need to go to a residence immediately, but we do need you to contribute more. I have been calculating, and we really need at least $1,500 a month to cover basic expenses. If you could get that amount, you could stay. $1,500. My check was $800. She was asking me to get $700 extra every month at my 68 years, without a job, without savings, without any source of additional income. It was an elegant way of telling me it was impossible for me to stay. And how am I supposed to get $700 extra every month, I asked her. "I don't know, Mom. You could sell something. You could ask for a loan using your pension as collateral. You could look for a little part-time job. There are many options if you really want to stay. A little part-time job." At 68, with my arthritic knees, with my high blood pressure, with my eyesight, that wasn't what it used to be. Jessica really believed I could get a job, or she was simply inventing excuses to make it seem like the decision to kick me out was mine and not hers. "Jessica," I told her with the calmest voice I could muster, "do you really think it is realistic to ask a woman of my age to look for a job? Mom, don't exaggerate. There are many older people who work. You can babysit, make cookies to sell clean houses a few hours a day. If you really want to stay, you will find a way." Babysitting. Making cookies to sell, cleaning houses, all the work I had done for 45 years to give her a dignified life, now she was suggesting it to me as if it were a novelty, as if it were easy to get those jobs at my age, as if it were my responsibility to solve the financial problems she and Richard had created. And if I can't get that extra money, I asked her, then we will have to look for other options. She answered me with a sigh. "I can't support 5 people on my salary alone, Mom. You have to understand my situation, her situation, not our situation, not the family's situation, but her specific situation. I was not part of the family that needed to be protected, but the problem that complicated her situation." That night, already in my room, I took out an old notebook and began to do the math. During the 3 years I had lived in that house, I had contributed $800 monthly. That is almost $30,000 in total. The money from the sale of my apartment that I had used to help them with the mortgage had been over $100,000. In total, I had contributed a fortune to that family without counting the value of all the domestic work I had done without charging. If I calculated my work as a housekeeper at minimum wage, 60 hours a week for 3 years, it represented thousands more. In total, my contribution to that family had been immense. And now they were telling me I was a burden, that I didn't contribute enough, that I needed to get more money or leave. The irony was bitter, but revealing. I had supported that family more than they had supported me, and not only economically, but emotionally, labor-wise, in all aspects. However, they had made me feel as if I were the one who owed them something, as if I were a leech abusing their generosity. The next day was Saturday, and Jessica decided to take the kids to visit Richard in jail. They invited me, but I felt my presence wasn't really desired, so I preferred to stay home. For the first time in months, I had the house completely to myself for several hours. I took advantage of that solitude to thoroughly check my belongings. I separated my important documents, birth certificate, ID, pension papers, some receipts that proved my contributions to the household expenses. I also set aside the photographs that meant the most to me, some keepsakes from James, the silver cross necklace that had belonged to my mother. While I was organizing my things, I found a letter James had written to me shortly before dying. I had kept it all these years, but I hadn't read it in a long time. With trembling hands, I unfolded the yellowed paper and reread my husband's words. "My dear Grace, if you are reading this, it is because I am no longer with you. I want you to know that there is nothing in this life I feel prouder of than having had you as a wife and as the mother of our daughter. You are the strongest and most generous woman I have ever known, and I know you will continue to be so even when I am not there. But please, my love, don't let anyone abuse your kindness. Don't let anyone make you feel less valuable than you are. You are a complete independent woman, capable of everything. Never forget it. I love you eternally, James." Tears ran down my cheeks as I finished reading. James knew me better than anyone, and from the grave he was reminding me of something I had forgotten in recent months, that I was a valuable woman regardless of what others thought of me. At that moment, I made a decision. I wasn't going to keep allowing them to treat me like a burden. I wasn't going to keep feeling guilty for existing. I wasn't going to keep begging for love and respect from people who clearly no longer valued me. I was 68, not 120. I still had life ahead of me. I still had decisions to make. I still had dignity to defend. When Jessica and the kids returned that afternoon, I noticed immediately she came back even more tense than usual. Apparently, Richard had told her his legal situation was more complicated than they had initially thought, that he would probably spend several months in prison before everything could be resolved. During dinner, Jessica was quiet and distant. The kids looked sad after seeing their dad in jail, and the family atmosphere was heavier than ever. I decided it was the right time to have an honest conversation. "Jessica," I said when we finished dinner, "I have been thinking about our conversation yesterday." She looked up with a hopeful expression, probably thinking I had found a magical way to get the extra money she had asked for. "I have decided that you are right," I continued. "It is time for me to make a definitive decision about my future." The kids stopped playing and paid attention to our conversation. Jessica straightened up in her chair, waiting for me to accept going voluntarily to a nursing home. "Tomorrow, I'm going to start looking for options," I told them, "but not the options you think." Jessica frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I am going to look for options that give me back my dignity." And without saying anything else, I got up from the table and went up to my room. For the first time in months, I went to sleep without feeling that knot in my stomach, because finally I had a plan. The next morning, I woke up with a mental clarity I hadn't felt in a long time. For the first time in months, I didn't feel that weight on my chest, that sensation of always apologizing for existing. I got up, made my bed carefully, and went down to make coffee. But this time, it was different. It wasn't the automatic gesture of someone who feels obligated to serve, but the action of someone who is taking control of her own life. During breakfast, I observed my family with other eyes. Jessica was quiet, nervously scrolling on her cell phone, probably thinking about Richard in prison, and the kids ate in silence. No one spoke to me as if I were a piece of furniture in the living room. After Jessica left for another job interview and the kids went to school, I called Connie, the only person I still trusted completely. I told her everything that had happened, from the pension episode to the conversation about looking for options. Connie was outraged and told me I couldn't accept that passively. It was she who suggested I seek professional help, both legal and psychological. Connie offered to accompany me downtown where we could talk to people specialized in seniors' rights. That same day, we went out together. First, we went to a law firm she knew. Attorney Miller explained my rights to me in detail and alerted me about the dangers of signing any document without careful analysis. He explained that there are specific legal protections against economic abuse and family abandonment. He also told me about care centers and institutions that could advise me on my situation. Mrs. Grace Attorney Miller told me with a seriousness that reassured me. You have inalienable rights as a senior citizen. No one can force you to hand over your entire pension. No one can force you to live in conditions that make you feel humiliated. And definitely, no one can threaten you with abandonment to get what they want from you. He explained I could make a formal declaration about my mental capacity and my will to live independently. He told me this would protect me from any attempt at forced commitment or transfer of assets without my consent. He also guided me to organize all documents that proved my financial contributions to the family over the years. He suggested I open a new bank account at a different bank where I could handle my money without anyone else having access to the information. The most important thing he advised me is that you understand you have no legal obligation to support your adult daughter and her family. You can help if you want and if you can, but you must never feel obligated to sacrifice your well-being for theirs. Your daughter is an adult woman with her own responsibilities. After the legal consultation, Connie took me to see some housing options for seniors. Not the nursing homes Jessica talked about, but apartments and small houses designed especially for independent seniors. We visited a very nice housing complex called Hope Gardens, where older people lived in their own apartments but had access to community services like a doctor, recreational activities, and emergency support. The coordinator of the place, Mrs. Patricia, welcomed me with great kindness and explained how everything worked. Here people maintain their complete independence. She told me as we walked through the well-kept gardens. Everyone has their own space, their own keys, their own decisions. But if they need help or company, there is a community willing to support. I saw people my age walking, calmly chatting on garden benches, participating in dance and craft classes. Everyone looked happy, relaxed with that dignity I had lost in recent months. The monthly cost was affordable, including the furnished apartment basic utilities, 24-hour security, and access to all community activities. With my pension and a small part-time job, I could live there comfortably. What kind of part-time job could people like me get? I asked Mrs. Patricia. We have agreements with several businesses in the area, she explained. There are receptionist jobs a few hours a day, childcare and daycares, support in libraries selling artisanal products. They are light jobs designed especially for seniors who want to stay active and generate extra income. For the first time in months, I saw a possible future for myself. A future where I didn't have to beg for affection, where I didn't have to feel guilty for taking up space, where I could be myself without fear of bothering anyone. I decided to reserve an apartment for the next month. Connie helped me with the initial paperwork, and we agreed to return the following week to sign the contract. When I returned home that afternoon, I wasn't the same Grace who had left in the morning. I had a clear plan, legal protection, and most importantly, I had recovered my dignity. In the following days, I began to discreetly look for the job options they had mentioned. I also started separating some essential belongings without arousing suspicion. During that week, I began to execute my plan step by step. The first thing I did was open the new bank account Attorney Miller had suggested. I went to a branch across town where there was no chance of anyone seeing me. I asked for my direct deposit to be switched there starting the next month. I also requested a debit card and learned to use it with the help of the bank teller. The second step was looking for a job. I went to the municipal library and spoke with the director, Mrs. Jenkins. She explained they needed a person to help with the reading program for children 2 afternoons a week. The job consisted of reading stories to small groups of kids between 5 and 8 years old and helping organize books after the activities. The pay was just enough to bridge the gap for the cost of the apartment at Hope Gardens. For the first time in a long time, I felt the satisfaction of achieving something on my own merits, of being valued for my skills and not for the cost I paid. The third step was organizing my most important documents and belongings. I separated my birth certificate, my ID, my pension papers, some receipts that proved my economic contributions to the family, and the photographs that meant the most to me. I also set aside essential clothes, my medicines, the few books I had, and some objects that had belonged to James. I stored everything discreetly in a small suitcase I hid in the back of my closet. I didn't want to create drama or arouse suspicion until I had everything ready to move. During those days, I noticed Jessica was increasingly nervous. Richard had been sentenced to 6 months in prison, and she would have to face the entire economic responsibility of the family alone during that time. One night, during dinner, Jessica brought up the topic of my future again. "Mom," she said while serving the rice I had prepared, "have you thought about what we talked about regarding contributing more or looking for other options?" I looked her directly in the eyes and answered with a calm that surprised even me. "Yes, honey, I have already made my decision." The kids stopped eating and paid attention. Jessica looked relieved, probably thinking I had accepted going to a nursing home or found some magical way to get more money. And well, she asked with an impatient tone, "What did you decide?" "I decided that you are right," I told her calmly. "It is time for everyone to be responsible for their own life." Jessica smiled with satisfaction. "I am very glad you understand, Mom. I am going to see that everything will be better this way." I didn't say anything else to her. I simply finished my dinner, picked up my plate, and went up to my room. She had no idea what my words really meant, but very soon she would find out. The following days were a strange mix of nervousness and excitement. On one hand, I felt sadness, realizing my relationship with my daughter had reached a point of no return. On the other hand, I felt a freedom I hadn't experienced in years, the thrill of making decisions for myself, of planning my own future. During that week, while Jessica was at work and the kids at school, Connie helped me visit the apartment I had reserved at Hope Gardens. It was small but perfect for one person. A comfortable bedroom, a small living room with a window to the garden, a kitchenette equipped with the basics, and a full bathroom. The most important thing was that it had my own door, my own keys, my own space, where no one could make me feel like an intruder. Mrs. Patricia introduced me to some of the residents. I met Mr. Roy, a retired teacher who gave chess lessons to the neighborhood kids. I also met Mrs. Helen, a seamstress who made dresses for parties in the area and who invited me to participate in the craft workshop they organized on Thursdays. And I met another Grace, a widow like me, who had moved there after having similar problems with her family. Honey, the other Grace, told me while we drank coffee in the community garden I also went through the same thing you are living. My son and daughter-in-law made me feel like I was a hindrance in my own house. One day I got tired and came here. It was the best decision of my life. Here I can be myself. I can invite whoever I want. I can watch TV at whatever time I feel like. I can cook whatever I crave. It is my space, do you understand? Yes, I understood perfectly. And every day that passed, it was clearer to me that I had made the right decision. On Friday of that week, Jessica arrived home earlier than usual. The kids hadn't returned from school yet, so I took the opportunity to have a private conversation with her. I decided to do one last test, give her one last chance to prove there was still some filial love in her heart. Jessica. I told her while making coffee for the two of us, "I want to ask you something, and I need you to answer me with honesty." She sat at the kitchen table looking at her cell phone as always. "Tell me, Mom, do you love me?" The question took her by surprise. She looked up from the phone and looked at me with an uncomfortable expression. "Of course I love you, Mom. Why do you ask that? Because I don't feel it anymore," I told her with genuine sadness. "For months you have treated me as if I were a burden, as if my existence were a problem you have to solve. I want to know if there is still something left of the love you once felt for me, or if I am just an annoying obligation to you." Jessica sighed and put the phone on the table. "Mom, it's not that I don't love you, it's that I am very stressed. Very pressured. I can't deal with the jail, with the household expenses, with the kids. I simply can't handle everything. And yes, it is true that economically your presence complicates things. Just economically?" I asked her. There was a long silence. Jessica avoided my gaze, playing nervously with her phone. Finally, she gave me the answer that confirmed everything I already knew. Mom, it is also complicated in other aspects. I can't have the freedom I need in my own house. You're always there, watching, opining, making me feel like a child who needs supervision. I understand you have good intentions, but sometimes I feel like I can't breathe. There was the truth. It wasn't just the money, it was my very presence that bothered her. I, who had sacrificed my entire life for her, was now an uncomfortable presence, limiting her freedom. I understand. I told her with a calm that surprised me. Thank you for being honest. Aren't you upset? She asked me, clearly surprised by my calm reaction. No, daughter, I am sad but not upset. It is better to know the truth than to live a lie. That night, after everyone fell asleep, I finished organizing my things. I packed everything I really needed in the suitcase. I wrote a letter explaining my decision without drama, without reproaches, simply explaining that I had understood the message and was going to solve the problem for her. In the letter, I wrote, "Dear Jessica, I understood that my presence in your house causes you more problems than benefits. You have been very clear about it, and I respect your honesty. I have decided to look for a place where I can live without being a burden to anyone. Don't worry about me. I have everything resolved. I hope you can now have the freedom you need in your own house. Take good care of Lily and Mason and tell them their grandma will always love them. With love, your mom." Saturday morning, I waited for Jessica to go out with the kids to do the grocery shopping. I had planned everything carefully. Connie was waiting for me on the corner with a taxi to take me to my new apartment. I left the letter on the kitchen table along with the house keys and my pharmacy card, where I bought my medicines. I took my suitcase, closed the door for the last time, and walked toward my new life. I didn't feel anger or resentment. I felt sadness, yes, but also immense liberation. For the first time in 3 years, I was going toward a place where I would be welcome, where my presence would be valued, where I could be myself without apologies. In the taxi, as we drove away from the house where I had lived the last 3 years, Connie took my hand. "Are you sure about your decision?" "Grace, completely sure," I answered her. "For the first time in a long time, I am doing something for me not to please others." When we arrived at Hope Gardens, Mrs. Patricia welcomed me with a warm smile. "Welcome to your new home, Mrs. Grace. You are going to be very happy here." As I unpacked my few belongings in my new apartment, I thought about Jessica and the kids. I knew that when they returned from shopping and found my letter, there would be commotion, perhaps a little panic, realizing they no longer had someone to take charge of everything. But I also knew it was best for everyone. My cell phone rang several times during the afternoon, but I didn't answer. I needed time to settle in to process everything that had happened to start this new stage of my life without the immediate pressures of explaining my decision. At night, I sat in my new living room, looking out the window toward the community garden. For the first time in months, I felt at peace. I had taken control of my life. I had recovered my dignity. I had chosen my own path. The sadness over the broken relationship with my daughter was still there, but it was no longer a sadness that paralyzed me. It was a sadness that had liberated me. The next day was Sunday, and at Hope Gardens they organized a community breakfast every Sunday. The other Grace knocked on my door to invite me to join her. "Come on, Grace, it is time you meet your whole new family." And she was right. As I walked down the stairs to the community dining room where genuine smiles and tension-free conversations awaited me, I understood that sometimes you have to lose a family to find another. Sometimes you have to distance yourself from those who hurt us to get closer to those who value us. My new life had just begun, and for the first time in a long time, the future looked bright. The letter I left on the kitchen table was simple and direct. I left to sort out my life. Don't worry about me. Grace. I didn't leave an address. I didn't leave a contact number. Only those words that summarized my new reality. While Jessica and the kids discovered my absence, I was in my small but cozy apartment I had rented at Hope Gardens, arranging my personal belongings I had brought in the move. Connie had helped me buy some basic furniture and essential utensils the week before. For the first time in years, I truly felt at home. Connie told me that Jessica had called her house desperate on Sunday afternoon, asking if I was okay if she knew where I was. My friend told her only that I was safe and well taken care of, but didn't reveal my exact location. Apparently, it was only after my departure that Jessica realized how much I did in the house. Without Richard to help, and without me to take care of domestic tasks, she was completely overloaded. There was no longer anyone to prepare meals to wait for the grandkids to return from school to keep the house organized. During my first week in the new place, I established a routine that filled me with satisfaction. I got up early, ate breakfast calmly while watching the birds in the community garden read a little, and then went to work at the municipal library on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. The work with the children gave me back something I had lost the feeling of being useful and valued by those who truly appreciated my presence. Mrs. Jenkins was delighted with my performance from the first day. The children responded wonderfully to my way of telling them stories, and their parents commented on how much they enjoyed the reading afternoons. Mrs. Grace, she told me at the end of my first week, you have a natural gift for connecting with the little ones. The children look for you specifically when they come to the library. It was true there was a group of 5 kids who already waited for me every Tuesday and Thursday with excitement. Little Lucy, a 6-year-old girl whose parents worked all day. Peter, a shy 7-year-old boy who had found in stories a way to express himself. The twins, Andy and Andrew, 8 years old, who always asked for pirate adventures. And little Sophie, 5 years old, who fell asleep in my arms while I read her princess stories. In the afternoons when I wasn't working, I participated in the community activities at Hope Gardens. On Mondays, there were dance classes with Mrs. Teresa, a former dance instructor who now taught basic steps to the residents. On Wednesdays, Mr. Roy organized chess and domino tournaments. On Fridays, Mrs. Helen led the craft workshop where we learned to make products we later sold at the town fair on weekends. But it was the other Grace who became my closest confidant. She had lived a situation very similar to mine with her son and daughter-in-law and understood perfectly what I had gone through. Look, Grace, she told me one afternoon while we were embroidering napkins in the workshop, family isn't always blood. Sometimes true family is the people who choose to be with you, not those who feel obligated to tolerate you. Her words resonated deeply in me. At Hope Gardens, I had found exactly that. People who chose my company, who valued my conversations, who were genuinely happy to see me every day. It was a feeling I had completely forgotten during my last months at Jessica's house. 2 weeks after my move, Connie arrived to visit me with news about the situation at my daughter's house. Grace, she told me while we drank coffee in my small living room, Jessica looked for me yesterday again. She looks very tired, very stressed. She asked me if I knew how to contact you. She says she needs to talk to you urgently. I asked her if she had mentioned anything specific, and Connie told me that apparently the economic situation in the house had become unsustainable. Without my check contributing to the monthly expenses, and with Jessica having to pay someone to watch the kids after school, the numbers simply didn't add up. Besides, without me taking charge of domestic labors, Jessica had to miss work several times to handle emergencies at home. She also told me Connie continued that Lily and Mason ask about you a lot, especially Mason. It seems the boy cries at night asking for his grandma Grace. That information filled me with sadness, but also with a strange satisfaction. I wasn't happy my grandkids were suffering, but it did reassure me to know my absence was felt, that my presence had value after all. One afternoon, while returning from the library after my shift with the kids, I saw a familiar car parked in front of Hope Gardens. It was Jessica's car. My heart raced, but I kept my cool. I had known this moment would arrive eventually. I walked calmly toward the entrance of the complex where Mrs. Patricia, the coordinator, was speaking with my daughter at the reception. Mrs. Grace, Mrs. Patricia, told me when she saw me arrive. "This young lady says she is your daughter and wants to speak with you. Are you willing to receive her?" I looked at Jessica. She looked haggard, tired with deep circles under her eyes I hadn't noticed before. She was wearing the same clothes she had worn to work, wrinkled from the long day. Her hands trembled slightly while she waited for my answer. "Yes," I told Mrs. Patricia. "She can come in." We went up in silence to my apartment. Jessica looked around with curiosity, probably surprised by how nice and tidy everything looked. I offered her coffee, but she declined. We sat in my small living room face to face after 3 weeks without seeing each other. Mom Jessica began with a trembling voice, "I need you to come back home." I looked her directly in the eyes. "Why, because we need you," she said, avoiding my gaze. "The kids miss you a lot. The house isn't the same without you. I can't handle everything alone." 3 weeks ago, you told me my presence complicated your life, I reminded her calmly. You told me you couldn't breathe with me in your house, that economically it was better if I left. What changed? Jessica broke down. She began to cry with a desperation I hadn't seen in her since she was a child. "Everything is falling apart, Mom. I don't have money to pay someone to watch the kids. I have had to miss work so much I already got a warning. The house is a disaster. Lily failed at school for arriving late every day, and Mason cries every night asking when you are coming back. And you," I asked her, "do you miss me or do you just miss the services I gave you?" The question left her speechless. She stayed silent for several minutes, drying her tears with a tissue I offered her. Finally, she gave me an answer that confirmed what I already knew. I miss everything," she said with a broken voice. "I miss the house being clean when I get home from work. I miss the food being ready. I miss not having to worry about the kids when I go out. I miss having help. Help." She didn't say she missed me, but that she missed my help. There was the fundamental difference she still didn't understand. "Jessica," I told her with deep sadness but without anger, "you don't miss me. You miss your free housekeeper. You miss the person who solved all your problems without asking anything in return." "That's not true," she protested weakly. "I do love you, Mom. Do you love me as a daughter loves her mother, or do you need me as a boss needs her employee?" She couldn't answer that question, and her silence was more eloquent than any word. I showed her my apartment, told her about my job at the library, about my new friends, about the activities I did every day. "Look, Jessica," I told her while we were in my small kitchen. "For the first time in 3 years, I wake up without feeling like I have to apologize for existing. Here, no one makes me feel like a burden. Here, my presence is valued, not tolerated. But it is so small," she said, seeing my apartment with an expression of pity. "And you are alone, Mom. At home, you have family. Being alone is not the same as feeling alone," I explained to her. "In your house, I felt lonelier than ever, surrounded by people who saw me as a problem. Here I have true friends, people who genuinely enjoy my company." Jessica stayed silent for a moment, processing my words. Then she changed strategy. "The kids really need you," she told me. "Lily's grades have dropped and Mason has become very rebellious. The other day he asked me if you had left because he behaved badly with you. That information hurt me deeply. I hadn't completely considered the impact my departure would have on my grandkids. They weren't to blame for their mother's attitude." "And what did you answer him?" I asked. "I told him you had decided to live in another place because you needed your space, but that you still loved them the same. At least she hadn't told them it was their fault." That reassured me a little. "Jessica," I finally told her, "I understand you are going through a difficult moment. I understand that without Richard and without me, everything is more complicated for you. But I can't return just to solve your practical problems." "What do you mean?" "I mean that if one day I decide to return, it has to be because you truly love me, because you value my presence as a person, not because you need my services. There would have to be a real change in the way you treat me, a genuine respect for my feelings and my opinions. I do respect you, Mom. No, Jessica, respect is not tolerating. Respect is valuing. It is including. It is considering the other person's feelings before making decisions that affect them." For 3 years, you treated me like a useful piece of furniture, not like your mother. Jessica stayed in my apartment almost 2 hours trying to convince me to return. She promised me everything would be different, that she would include me in family decisions, that she would treat me with more consideration. But her promises sounded hollow, born of desperation, and not of a genuine change of heart. I need time to think, I finally told her. I can't make such an important decision in a single afternoon. How much time, she asked with anxiety. I don't know, maybe weeks, maybe months, maybe never. That last possibility clearly scared her. Mom, you can't be serious. We are family. Being family is not an automatic obligation, Jessica. It is something that is built day by day with love, respect, and mutual consideration. You destroyed that construction with your words and your actions. Rebuilding it will take time, if it is even possible. When Jessica left that afternoon, I stayed sitting in my living room thinking about everything that had happened. On one hand, it hurt me to see my daughter so broken, so desperate. On the other hand, I realized her desperation wasn't born of love toward me, but of the practical need for my help. During the following weeks, Jessica called me several times. At first, they were desperate calls, begging me to return, promising me everything would be different. Then they became negotiation calls, offering me specific conditions. She would give me my own room with a private bath, include me in family decisions, respect my schedule and my tastes. But there was a revealing detail in all her offers. They were still conditions for me to return to help her, not invitations for me to return to be part of a family that loved me. The difference was subtle, but fundamental. 1 month after my move, Connie arrived with worrying news. "Grace," she told me with a serious expression, "I think Jessica is considering coming to take you by force. Yesterday, she asked me about your legal rights, about if a child can force an elderly parent to return home. That information alarmed me, but also confirmed I had made the right decision by seeking legal advice from the beginning. I immediately called Attorney Miller, who reassured me. Mrs. Grace, he told me over the phone, no one can force you to live in a place where you don't want to be. You are an older person, but that doesn't mean you have lost your rights. As long as you maintain your mental capacity, which is clearly demonstrated, your decisions about where and how to live must be respected." He suggested we make a formal declaration before a notary confirming my mental capacity and my voluntary decision to live independently. He also advised me to document any attempt at pressure or manipulation by my family. That same week, Lily and Mason appeared at Hope Gardens accompanied by Connie. My friend explained she had run into them at the park asking for me and decided to bring them so they could see me and calm down. Seeing my grandkids after a month was a bittersweet experience. Lily, now 17, had visibly matured in those few weeks. Mason, 13, looked taller but also thinner, as if he weren't eating well. Grandma Grace Mason told me while hugging me tight, "Why did you leave without saying goodbye?" His question hurt me more than all of Jessica's pleas put together, because sometimes adults have to make difficult decisions to take care of ourselves. I explained to him with as much honesty as possible. "Was it because of something we did?" Lily asked with tears in her eyes. "No, my love. You guys never did anything wrong. This is between your mom and me." I showed them my apartment. I introduced them to the other Grace and Mr. Roy. I told them about my job at the library. We spent the whole afternoon together, and for the first time in a long time, I genuinely enjoyed my grandkids' company without the tension of feeling I was bothering someone. When it was time to leave, Mason hugged me again. "Grandma, can we come visit you again?" "Of course you can," I answered, "whenever you want and whenever your mom gives you permission." Lily, who had been quiet most of the afternoon, approached me before leaving. "Grandma," she told me in a low voice at home, "it isn't the same without you. Mom is always angry the food doesn't taste the same, and no one helps us with homework. Your mom is going through a hard time," I explained. "Try to be patient with her." "But are you going to come back?" I looked her in the eyes, those eyes that reminded me so much of Jessica when she was a child. "I don't know, Lily. That depends on many things." After the kids left, I stayed thinking about the complexity of my situation. I didn't want my grandkids to suffer because of the conflict between their mother and me, but I also couldn't sacrifice my well-being and my dignity just to spare them that suffering. That night, while dining in the community hall with my new friends, Mrs. Helen asked me a question that helped clarify my thoughts. "Grace," she said while we shared a stew Mrs. Teresa had prepared, "do you think it is possible to forgive without forgetting?" "What do you mean?" "I mean if one can forgive someone who hurt us, but without pretending the damage never happened. Forgiving without being foolish." Her question made me reflect deeply. Could I forgive Jessica for the way she had treated me, but without automatically returning to the same situation that had allowed that mistreatment? "I think it is possible," I finally answered her. "I think forgiving doesn't mean returning to the same thing as before. It means releasing the grudge, but not forgetting the lessons learned." "Exactly, Mrs." Helen told me with a wise smile. "Forgiveness is not synonymous with automatic reconciliation. You can forgive from a distance." Those words resonated in my mind during the following days. Maybe that was the key. I could forgive Jessica for hurting me, but that didn't mean I had to go back to exposing myself to the same treatment. Forgiveness could exist without reconciliation, at least until there was real evidence of change. 2 months after my departure, Jessica stopped calling. Connie told me that apparently she had hired a lady from the neighborhood to watch the kids after school and help with some housework. The cost was considerable, but she had managed to organize herself to pay for it. "It seems she finally understood you aren't coming back," Connie told me, "or at least that you aren't coming back on her terms." She was right. Jessica had been forced to accept the reality that I was not her free housekeeper, but a person with rights and her own dignity. She had to learn to solve her problems without depending on my unconditional sacrifice. In my new life, every day brought small satisfactions. The library kids had completely adopted me, and their parents treated me with genuine respect and affection. The craft workshop had produced enough products for us to participate in the town Christmas fair, where we sold everything we had made. Mr. Roy had taught me to play chess, and I could already win some games against him. But the most important thing was that I had recovered something I thought lost forever. The feeling of being worth something for who I was not, for what I could do for others. In Hope Gardens, I was Grace, an interesting woman with stories to tell, opinions that mattered, and a presence that was appreciated. I wasn't the employee mom, nor the caretaker grandma, nor the problem mother-in-law. I was simply myself. One afternoon in December, while we were decorating the community garden for the holidays, I saw a family car approaching slowly. It was Jessica again, but this time she was accompanied by Lily and Mason. They didn't get out of the car immediately, but stayed there watching me while I hung little lights on the trees, along with my friends. After a few minutes, they got out and walked toward where I was. Jessica looked different, less tense, less desperate, but also more tired and definitely humbler. "Hi, Mom," she said simply. "Hi, Jessica." Lily and Mason ran to hug me, and I received them with all the love I had kept during those months of separation. Jessica stayed a few steps away, observing our reunion. "We came to invite you to Christmas Eve dinner," she told me when the kids let me go. "If you want to come, of course." Her invitation sounded different this time. It wasn't a desperate plea or an emotional demand. It was a simple invitation without pressure, respecting my right to decide. And after dinner, she asked, "After dinner, if you want to stay, we bring you back here. If you want to stay longer, that is also fine. And if you don't want to go at all, we also understand." For the first time in a long time, Jessica was offering me options without conditions, without emotional manipulation, without desperate promises we knew she couldn't keep. "Let me think about it," I told her. "It's okay," she answered. "The kids wanted you to know we miss you. Me, I also miss you, Mom. I miss you, not just your help." Those last words sounded different. For the first time, I felt perhaps there was a real possibility my daughter had learned the difference between needing me and loving me. That night, while dining with my friends at Hope Gardens, I told them about Jessica's invitation. The other Grace, who had become my closest confidant, gave me the wisest advice I could have received. Grace, she told me while we drank coffee after dinner, you can go to that dinner if you want. You can even enjoy it. But always remember that now you have a home to return to. You have options, and that changes everything. She was right. The fundamental difference between my previous situation and the current one was that now I had the power to choose. I no longer depended on the kindness or tolerance of others to have a place to live. I had my own space, my own friends, my own life. And that independence gave me something I had lost for years, the possibility of relating to my family from a position of strength, not vulnerability. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, it was a future I controlled. 6 months have passed since I left Jessica's house, and I can say with all certainty that they have been the calmest months I have lived in years. My small apartment became a true home decorated with my most precious memories and organized exactly how I like. I wake up every morning without the weight of having to please someone or walking carefully so as not to bother. I make my coffee, read my book on the small but sunny terrace, and feel a peace I had forgotten existed. Connie visits me regularly, and together we have discovered small pleasures of life I had lost when I lived trying to be useful for a family that didn't value me. The work at the library has become the light of my afternoons. The children wait for me with new stories they want to hear, and their parents have included me in family celebrations where my presence is genuinely appreciated. I learned from Connie that the situation at Jessica's house finally stabilized. With Richard still in prison and her having to work to support the house alone, the financial difficulties were enormous at the beginning. Apparently, my daughter finally understood how much my check helped the family budget, how much my presence facilitated the domestic routine, but she also learned to live without depending on my unconditional sacrifice. I decided to accept the invitation to Christmas Eve dinner. It was a strange but healing experience. Lily and Mason received me with sincere joy that filled my heart. Jessica behaved differently, more respectful, less demanding, finally recognizing my autonomy. During dinner, she included me in conversations, asked my opinion on family decisions, and for the first time in years, I felt like a guest of honor instead of a housekeeper. At the end of the night, when it was time to leave, Jessica walked me to the car we had called. "Mom," she told me with a trembling voice, "I know I made many mistakes. I know I hurt you. I'm not asking you to return. I only ask you to give me the opportunity to rebuild our relationship from respect." For the first time, I heard in her voice something I had waited for months, real recognition of her mistakes, not desperate pleas born of necessity. Now we see each other once a month. Jessica comes to visit me at Hope Gardens with the kids, or I go to have lunch at her house on Sundays, but always with the clarity that I have my own home to return to. The difference is fundamental. I am no longer the tolerated mother living off her daughter's charity, but the grandmother who chooses when and how to relate to her family. Yesterday, while watering my plants on the terrace, I saw an older lady walking alone down the street. She reminded me of myself a year ago, carrying the weight of feeling unnecessary, invisible a problem others had to solve. I smiled at her from my terrace, and she waved back. In her eyes, I saw the same loneliness I had carried, and I wanted to scream at her that it was possible to find peace, that it is never too late to recover dignity. Tonight, already home, I closed the terrace windows, made my chamomile tea, and sat in front of the small altar where I have James's photo. I took my reflection notebook and wrote with a calm heart. Some bonds are like leaves in autumn, beautiful, while they last, but freer when they learn to let go. Sometimes the biggest beginning is the silence one chooses to keep. We are curious to know how far this story reached. Where are you watching us from? Comment below.